Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I've waited all day and I've been checking all the available sources for a statement from the SADC panel of elders. This is the group of individuals in whose hands the fate of the country now lies. Zimbabwe held its election on the 23rd of August. Normally, SADC election observers will see no evil, hear no evil, and say no evil. And therefore then rubber stamp the election results as substantially free, fair, and credible, and thus grant Zanu PF legitimacy. This has been happening since Zimbabwe failed to implement even one meaningful reform to end the case of rigged elections during the 2008 to 2013 Government of National Unity. This year, SADC election observers, headed by Dr. Nevis Mumba, former vice president in Zambia, pushed aside the default position of see no evil, hear no evil, and talk no evil. And they spoke the truth. They pointed out that the elections on the 23rd of August was flawed and illegal. It is impossible to say how anyone could pretend otherwise. These are elections in which ZEC failed to produce even something as basic as a verified voters roll. Intimidation was rampant. There are many stories of people being frog marched to attend Zanu PF rallies and then frog marched to go and vote. And so when SADC election observers pointed these things out, it must have taken Zanu PF by surprise, because they genuinely believed that SADC was going to just rubber stamp the usual. Instead of rejecting that finding outright, Zanu PF, I'm sure with the help of a few other SADC heads of state, decided that they're going to invite this SADC panel of elders whose primary purpose is to review the SADC election observer mission's report with a view of watering it down so that the report can now say, yes, there were flaws, yes, there were irregularities, but these will be pushed to recommendations. And so the most important thing is to say, well, they are substantially free, fair, and credible. Grant Zanu PF political legitimacy and move all these other flaws to recommendations for future. Recommendations everybody knows, of course, that Zanu PF will ignore, and they've ignored them in the past. This group of elders have been in the country in Zimbabwe since the beginning of the week, I think. And they're supposed to complete their mission today. And one had hoped that they would have given a press statement to give their decision. I haven't seen any. So the nation still waits. One can only imagine the pressure this group is under to endorse these flawed elections. But they must also know that Zanu PF has got away with rigged elections ever since the country's independence in 1943. Sorry, in 1980, 43 years ago. And they must also know that endorsing the rigged elections would only help to perpetuate Zimbabwe's, the people of Zimbabwe's long suffering. Because if there was one thing that one can point at that has kept Zimbabwe, that has made Zimbabwe a failed state, it is the failure to hold free and fair elections. So they've got a heavy responsibility here. They've never been called to endorse a SADC election monitoring report in the past. Even in 2008, when for the first time SADC refused to rubber stamp Zanu PF's election victory in that year, there was no SADC panel of elders to review that report. The fact that the African Union observers also noted the same problems, the same flaws and irregularities, is making SADC sit up. But I'm sure the AU will rubber stamp these elections if SADC does it. So the responsibility, you can imagine, is weighing heavily on these elders. Meanwhile, Zanu PF has gone on with the preparation for the inauguration. They've sent out letters to invite guests to witness the inauguration. The letters that have been circulating on the social media stated that ambassadors accredited to Zimbabwe are welcome to attend the inauguration if their president attends the inauguration. In other words, the ambassadors are not welcome if the president of their country does not attend. And so far, it is not clear who is going to attend. Very few countries have congratulated Mnangagwa on his victory after this report came out. I think many countries are realizing that as much as they would have happily rubber stamped another rigged election, now that the cat is out of the bag, it's another matter. They're finding it very difficult to rubber stamp another rigged election. They're finding it impossible, in fact. because they know they will be under enormous pressure. Why they did that? This is the kind of thing that's so historic that will form part of your legacy. Now that the cat is out of the bag, now that the genie is out of the bottle, putting it back is proving to be a challenge. Chamisa, on his part, has been claiming that these preparations by Zanu PF, people should forget it. Something else is coming. I think this is just Chamisa posturing. Chamisa and this Triple C have no more control over this matter as anyone else out there. In fact, the matter has come to this crisis, as much as Triple C would want to claim that it was because they participated in these flawed elections that matters have come to this. That is actually an empty claim, because the SADC election observers noted that the process was flawed. They picked out, for instance, the problem that ZEC had failed to produce a verified voters roll. Chamisa and company knew there was no verified voters roll. They were reminded of that. They were told again and again this, and yet they still wanted to participate. Some of the vote rigging that has been taking place, Chamisa was even boasting that he has plugged all the Zanu PF vote rigging loopholes. And now he's claiming that the elections were rigged. But the process was flawed and illegal. Yeah, you knew all those things and you still decided you would participate. The crisis we are facing has got nothing to do with Triple C. And it is important that Zimbabweans should realize that, because that is part of the awakening. You realize that, you immediately realize that Zimbabwe could have been saved this tragic situation if Chamisa and company had actually implemented the democratic reforms way back during the GNU, when they had the golden opportunity to do so. SADC even gave them an opportunity to correct themselves after having failed to implement even one meaningful reform during the GNU. SADC leaders told Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends that you should not participate in the 2013 elections without reforms. MDC leaders disregarded that advice and participated. This is the point where SADC gave up. Said, fine, it's okay. Let them participate. Whoever is declared the winner will just rubber stamp it. And that's what they did in 2013. That's what they did in 2018. 2023 has been a surprise, a pleasant surprise, because SADC all of a sudden decided, no, we have got to go back to free, fair, and credible elections. We cannot pretend that an election in which there's not even a verified voters roll can ever be judged free, fair, and credible. We have got to watch this with the greatest interest. I do hope that this SADC panel of elders are not going to be bribed, bamboozled, or whatever by Zanu PF into watering down the report by Dr. Mumba. That report should stand. And Zanu PF should know that those elections were so flawed and so illegal, they cannot possibly produce a legitimate government. What Mnangagwa is doing is actually a repeat of history. In 2008, then ZANU PF President Robert Mugabe did exactly the same thing. SADC condemned the 2018 elections because of the blatant cheating to turn over the March results, and then the wanton violence that was the precursor to the runoff. Mugabe ignored their comments. He went ahead and had his swearing ceremony. This time it happened so quickly, he didn't even have the time to invite any of the neighboring leaders to join it. And a few days later, he was off to Egypt, I think, for the African Union meeting. And it was at that meeting that most of the African leaders gave him a cold shoulder. That's when he realized he could not, this was not sustainable. It was then that Mugabe agreed to go to the table and negotiate with SADC the 2008 Global Political Agreement that led to the formation of the Government of National Unity. The primary task of the Government of National Unity of 2008 to 2013 was to implement the democratic reforms to restore the freedoms and rights of all the Zimbabwean citizens, including the right to a meaningful vote. Alas, Mugabe managed to bribe Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends to forget about the reforms. And that is, and hence the reason why after 5 years of the GNU, not even one token reform was implemented. And the more reason we should be paying attention this time. Because as much as both ZANU PF and CCC are concerned about SADC panel of elders' failure to endorse or to water down the Dr. Mumba's report. ZANU PF is concerned because it knows that if it doesn't get legitimacy, then it is in trouble. Chamisa is excited because he knows that if that was to happen, then the country will have to have a government of national unity of some form or other. ZANU PF is positioning itself with the hope that if there's going to be another GNU, ZANU PF will retain total control of that just as much as ZANU PF retained total control of the first GNU. And Chamisa and company, for their part, I think they'll be just content to have the same ministerial positions the ministerial limousines, the generous salaries, etc., etc. What we Zimbabweans should be careful about is that we do not want another GNU, a repeat of the first 2008-2013 GNU that failed to implement even one meaningful democratic reform. This is a second bite at the cherry for the people of Zimbabwe. This must count. This GNU must implement all the democratic reforms to make sure that Zimbabwe is back on the democratic path, so that Zimbabwe restores all the basic freedoms and human rights for all its citizens. This second GNU must deliver without failure. And the only way we can be certain of that is to make sure that neither Zanu PF nor CCC should play any meaningful role in the next GNU. If they fail to implement even one token reform during the last GNU, what hope do we have that they will do so not this time? None. There are Zimbabweans out there who understand what these reforms are all about and who can get them implemented. What we must do is make sure that Zanu PF and CCC does not hold the nation to ransom. At the present moment, both parties are positioning themselves to make sure that they hold the nation to ransom. We must be on the lookout for it. The fact that the panel of elders have taken the whole week and they still haven't made a decision, a pronouncement on that, to me is an indication that they are definitely realizing, no, they are being pressured to rubber stamp something that they themselves know deep inside would be the wrong thing for Zimbabwe. Rubber stamping another rigged election is not going to get Zimbabwe out of this mess. It's a pity that the country failed to use the get out of jail card during the first GNU. What Dr. Mumba has done is given the nation the opportunity to get another get out of jail card. And these panel of elders know they are being talked into canceling that get out of jail card. And I hope this has taken this long because they themselves cannot do it. They know that that will be the worst thing they've ever done in their whole life, at least as far as Zimbabwe is concerned. We must be ready. If the panel of elders do us the great favor and refuse to water down Dr. Mumba's report, we must be prepared then, the ordinary Zimbabweans. We must be prepared to make sure that the next GNU has competent people. The idea that Zanu PF and CCC can run the next GNU again as they failed to run the first one is unthinkable. We cannot afford to fail to implement the democratic reforms and end this case of rigged elections and bad governance. This is our chance. We must not waste it. Yes, at the present moment, we should wait to see what this panel of elders have said. But the fact that it has taken this long gives me hope that they are not being easily persuaded. And I think they cannot hold it back anymore. What could possibly happen is that they will leave the country without saying anything. And Mnangagwa will go ahead with his inauguration on Monday. And judging from the reaction, the international reaction, I don't think there will be many heads of state attending the inauguration on Monday. And you will be hoping that it can be business as usual. I hope SADC at that point will stand up and make it abundantly clear that they do not recognize the Zimbabwe government as legitimate. At that point, they cannot pretend the Dr. Mumba report is not valid. It is valid. They have got to stand up and be counted and tell Mnangagwa that the regime is not legitimate. If he decides he's going to go ahead regardless, then SADC must take the necessary steps. Impose sanctions on the regime. And the AU must do the same thing. Africa is in a mess because while Africans have claimed we want an African solution to our African problems, whenever there's been a problem, they've failed to stand up and be counted. That has not helped Africa at all. We are facing a crisis in Zimbabwe, a crisis that has caused heartbreaking suffering to the ordinary Zimbabwean, but a crisis that is also holding the whole SADC region to ransom. The potential of Zimbabwe becoming ungovernable, chaotic, is unbelievable. And who would want to invest in a region that is unstable? Yes, we have not reached the same level of instability as some of the other regions, but we are slowly getting there. The only time there's been a regime change in Zimbabwe was in 2017, and it was a result of a coup. By failing to hold free, fair, and credible elections, and in this case, by failing to stand up and say, no, you must hold free, fair, and credible elections, SADC is forcing Zimbabwe into a situation where the only way to change, to have meaningful regime change, is by having street protests or another coup, or both. This is not going to bring stability. The last coup, the 2017 coup, replaced one dictator with another. Nothing changed. Thank God the country was spared the bloodshed. But the next coup may not turn out the same. We may have serious bloodshed. And at the end of the day, still get another dictator taking over. Zimbabwe can be solved. The Zimbabwe situation can be solved. If any of the elders, the SADC panel of elders, have a chance to hear my voice, your decision to refuse to endorse, to reject, Dr. Mumba's report will go down in history as a significant step in trying to end Zimbabwe's political and economic crisis. On the other hand, if you should water down the Dr. Mumba report, then you have condemned the country to chaos. You, Dr. Mumba and his colleagues had the courage to do the right thing. And you have undermined it. We must be prepared for a Zimbabwe in which Zanu PF is told your regime is illegitimate. And we must be prepared to set our demands for a competent government of national unity that will implement the democratic reforms, finally implement the democratic reforms, all of them, that will get Zimbabwe back on a democratic path. Nelson Chamisa and his friend Mnangagwa would want to be the key players in that government of national unity. The worst thing that we can do is allow those two clowns to do that. They failed to implement even one meaningful reform for selfish reasons. They will do the same again for the same selfish reasons. These are interesting times. I think if by tomorrow we do not hear from the panel of elders, we can assume they've refused to water down the report. And Mnangagwa is going ahead with his inauguration on Monday and pretending that the world has forgotten about the Dr. Mumba's damning report. What we would like Mnangagwa to remember is that we have not forgotten it. That damning report is what is on the table right now. Those elections were so flawed and so illegal, they could not possibly produce a legitimate government. And for Mnangagwa to go ahead and be sworn in to form the next government will not change that. And for our friend Chamisa to be claiming that he is in control, he is dictating what is going to happen next, it's just a lie. If Dr. Mumba had not come up with this report, we would be talking something else here. And so it's ridiculous to hear CCC claiming that they've accomplished anything here. They are the ones who landed us in this mess. And if they think they're going to play a prominent role in the next government of national unity, they need to think twice about it, because that is not going to happen. We are not going to let anybody, Zanu PF or CCC, hold the nation to ransom again. They failed to implement even one meaningful reform during the last GNU. They do not deserve another chance. We need, I think tomorrow I'll be monitoring this with an eagle eye. And if the panel of elders come up with a statement, I think that will be worth discussing. But if by end of the day tomorrow, there's no statement at all, that is also worth commenting. But I will be even more hopeful that it can only be because they refused to be arm-twisted to water down Dr. Mumba's report. And that is positive for the country. So with that, I would like to say good night. Thank you very much.